The story of the victory of Hashmonai revolt is celebrated by the 8-day Hanukkah holiday. Hanukkah means dedication or inauguration or rededication, in this case of the temple in Jerusalem. And the holiday is celebrated by Jews in Israel around the candles, which are put in special fixtures called Hanukkah, not to be confused with menorah. Hanukkah, Hanukkah. And dreidels and songs, and how else you cannot pass a Jewish holiday without the special foods, in this case donuts and latkes. And by Jews in USA focusing on the central column of lights and lighting the candles, and it is called the Festival of Lights. And it seems to appear that it's only come to give some kind of a good rivalry to the Christmas tree, which, by the way, they both occur in the same time, albeit Jewish holidays are dictated by the lunar calendar, not by the solar, meaning that it's not an exact day in the Roman calendar, which is a fixed solar. But the story of the victory of Hashmonai brothers, starting with the command of Yhuda Maccabee, seems to fade away, to vanish, to be pushed aside, somehow buried and forgotten. But in the original script of events, there was a lot of blood and harsh battles and robust warriors covered with sweat and blood, and there was spies and use of intelligence and cunning moves and developing of improvised arms and tactics, and assassinations and conspiracy and quarrels, and surely the regular Jews against Jews hostility and battles. But the brothers of Hashmonai, they held on. They held on. They were one unified body, something that is hardly ever seen, not in Jewish history, and maybe not even elsewhere, as the Bible continuously tells us about this brother against this brother, or all of his brothers, or the son against his father, only to seize control, the hunger to rule. And the blood connection is only a suggestion. And by the way, we will see soon that even Hashmonai dynasty itself ended this way too. Now, why did I call Yehuda Maccabee the Lion of Judea and his brothers the Lions of Judea? Because the lion symbolizes power and might and bravery and leadership. And the sign of the tribe of Judah was the lion. He is the leader, he is the king. However, the road to be a king is very harsh and difficult for anyone who knows and familiar with the life cycle of male lions. They know it. Young male lions are being thrown out of the pride at early age, each one to his own destiny. And that destiny is very strenuous. But if they being pushed out by more than one individual male, the chance of survival is going up. The chance of survival, the journey, is going up because they develop a special brotherhood connection. It is a special bond which does not exist elsewhere, by the way. In the human race, don't count on it. So this is why I call them the brotherhood. Side note, I will try to use the original names. You will have to get used to the names in the original form and not necessarily in the English version. So if I say Yehuda, it means Judah, or sometimes called Judas. And Judea is the province, and it is also in Hebrew, it is also called Yehuda. It's by the son of Jacob, the tribe of son of Jacob, called Yehuda. And Jonathan means Jonathan, etc., etc. Now, how long this unity lasted? How long lasted this euphoria? Hardly even one generation. How else? One brother for the other. Brothers of Hashmonai dynasty started fighting with one another altogether. This dynasty did not even last 8 years. And it ended by one brother, Aristobulus II, fighting another brother, Hyrcanus II, and he called the Romans to intervene and help him. And Pompey, yes, said, sure, multis gratias, soldiers, pack up, we're going over Judea. That's how it ended. The Roman soldiers entered Judea, a quick siege over Jerusalem. They entered Jerusalem while massacring 12,000 Jews, and this is how actually the Hashmonai dynasty ended. Now, most of the details and success of events we know from a book called, in English, Maccabees 1, in Greek, Maccabeon. I will explain more about these books further on. There are 5 books. They are called the Books of the Maccabees, but the most important one is the first book for the scope of this beginning of the revolt. The revolt is Maccabees 1 that describe in details, and it's the first book that's called in Greek Maccabeon. But the original book was lost, and the original book was probably written in Hebrew or most likely in Aramaic, which is the language that was spoken in Judea then. The original was lost, but we found its Greek translation and translated it back. The book seemed to be authentic and quite detailed, and it seems that the author was one who knew the area well, and he knew the events, and he knew the participants, and maybe he even participated himself in a few battles. Of course, another important source is Josephus Flavius, called in English Josephus, with his books about the history of the Jews. But you have to consider that this book is not tell you about those events in first hand. He lived some 250 years later, so he borrowed from others, and most likely from the same author of Maccabees A. A word about Josephus Flavius, born under the name of Yosef ben Matityahu. Yosef, the son of Matityahu, Mattathias, not the same Matityahu as in we talk about here in these events. The book, it's a big book. We have Josephus Flavius. You can even see his picture. It's a big book. You can read it at night, every night. Now, about Yosef ben Matityahu, believe it or not, Yosef ben Matityahu, Josephus Flavius, was the commander of the Galilee revolt against the Romans about 65-70 AD. We'll talk about later period, but they all decided to, after they surrounded it, before the massacre of the Romans, they decided to commit suicide. He managed to be the last one, and he deflected to the Romans, changed his name to Josephus Flavius, and decided to write the history of the Jews. So his stories are somehow biased, and they have to be taken cautiously. Now, the irony is that those books of the Maccabees were not included in the Hebrew Bible, but I will explain about it later on. Now, a word about this presentation. The purpose of the presentation is to bring a viewer to the spirit of the time and period, and it's not easy because it is hard, very difficult to bring a spectator born in the 21st century, all surrounded by technology, to some region and community living 2000 years ago in a completely different lifestyle. But this presentation, I will not, in purpose, I will not bring any background noise and pop-up videos and sceneries of clashing armies and pyrotechnics and sound effects and images of Judah or his brothers, because there is none. And there are no evidence, and there are hardly any image or even vital details, and the imagination is greater than any presentation. And for each one of you, release your imagination and let you fly high. The same reason of lack of evidence and findings, we actually know nothing about Yehuda Maccabee. How did he look like? Was he tall, short, skinny, thin, muscular? What was he wearing? Did he have a wife, kids? We know nothing, but maybe it's better not to know. And each one of you can imagine what is right and just in his own eyes, and let your imagination fly high. And why is that? Because I noticed that we are visual people, images and pictures, even though if they sometimes have no bearing of the matter, as sometimes as appear in some other videos, they are engraved in our memories, and all we come out is just remembering those images. So I will let you imagine and dream, and any photo, image or video that I might have presented only will do the reality injustice. And even the fabulous Bible paintings of Gustav Doré are not really describing the scenes as they really have been, because the reality is beyond any comprehension. Now, all I bring here, even though it's based on historical events, it's all my imagination perception, to be clear. It's important to know that I'm not an historian, I'm not pretending to be one, I'm not aspiring to be one, I'm neither an archaeologist, I'm an engineer by my qualification, a regular person. But I like to read history, especially when it deals with big events, because the future is the past. It all repeats itself with different casting and different decor and different actors. And like somebody said, a nation that does not know its past, its future is vague and obscure. It is told about Napoleon Bonaparte, who entered this region on the day of 9th of Av, that's a Jewish lunar calendar, and he observed some Jews sitting on the floor and mourning. What about are you mourning? Our temple was destroyed on this day. Okay, when was that? Some 2000 years ago. Wow, said Napoleon, this is a nation that has a future, because a nation who remembers its past has a future. And this is why I remind you today about a story from the past, but I'm not an historian. Because history, especially faraway history, is a kind of a puzzle when you try to combine together this and that finding, and you'll try to create a complete image, and each historian will bring the image and puzzle to his own view, and there's hardly any unified agreement between all the historians about what really happened. In his book Samson, Samson, that's the Hebrew version. In his book Samson, Jabotinsky, the author of the story, he tells about Samson, and Jabotinsky describes how Manoach, the father of Samson, has a concern about his wife, because the history, the man who writes the events comes to him and he say what happened, and Manoach has a concern that his wife might be portrayed as an undecent woman after having encounter in the fields with some stranger, and a son will be born, a mighty son that will be a leader. But don't worry, Manoach, said the history writer, because what I will write, this will be the history. In the historical story about the fall of Masada, and for you who do not know, it was a Roman siege in the desert, in the Judean desert, tabletop mountain, about 73 AD, by the Dead Sea, tabletop mountain in the desert. The author, Josephus Flavius, we just talked about him. He was called then Yosef ben Matityahu. That's the Jewish historian. He brings up the immortal speech of Elazar ben Yair. He was the commander of Masada. He's convincing his comrades to all commit suicide before the Romans take over and enter the fortress. And by the way, it is very recommended to climb this mountain early in the morning before sunrise, and to sit on the top in the late afternoon after all the tourists left, and read this immortal speech in front of the silence of the desert scenery. But wait, if there might be a little problem here. If everybody committed suicide, then who rewrote and scribed the speech? Okay, they say there were two women hid in the tunnels, but if they hid in the tunnels, how much did they hear? How much actually do they remember? You see, it is probably Josephus who wrote the speech. It is his own speech he never made, because it was in Yudfat in the Galilee, the same setting, surrounded by Romans in the mountains of the Galilee. All committed suicide except Josephus, who managed to be the last one and deflected to the Romans. So history is in the eyes of whoever writes the history and the eyes of the beholder. So you may ask, why do I have any merit to tell you the story of the Hashmonai revolt? It is because, reason number one, I know the area, the said places, the geography, the topography of the places and where all the revolt occurred. You could probably figure out by now already by my name and accent that I grew up in that land. But it is more than that. Even though it is all a small country, therefore it's easy to get acquainted with, I have a special affinity with the region of Bet Shemesh. Once under Judah tribe and Judea province, those are the entrance hills between the coastal plain and the mountains of Jerusalem. Around the hills of Bet Shemesh, translated house of sun, Shemesh sun, not to be confused with the house of the rising sun. It is where Samson, his name is Shimshon, comes from. Shemesh, the same root of the sun. He grew up. It is where the nation was forged, if you ask me. And for me, around the majestic and mysterious hills of Bet Shemesh, the land calls my name, the mountains call my name, generation salute and greet me. I can hear it all. But not so many people know this place. You see, to know really this place, one has to ditch the screens and the apps and leave the comfort of the air-conditioned SUV and to really walk the land and walk the land in different seasons, in early morning, high noon, late at night when the coyotes are orchestrating the silence of the night, and listen to clues and what history may tell you. It's like when you take your dog outside, he sniffs here, he sniffs there, every curbside he sniffs. And what does he sniff? Every curbside tells him a long story, a long history. Reason number 2 is that, as you probably understood, I grew up in that land. It is notorious that every youngster in that land is drafting into the military, boys and girls. And I elected to go to an elite combat unit. That's where men are forged, if you ask me. And I climbed up the ranks. I served as an officer in command and tactical positions. And therefore I supposed to know something about warfare and tactics and battles, even though they're not the same as the ancient warfare, but there are some similarities. Therefore I can maybe analyze the battles of the said period. And reason number 3 is that actually I have no merit whatsoever to tell you anything about anything. Because, with today's technology, everybody can learn anything about anything. Everybody can fly over this area with computer technology. Everybody can study about Hashmonai, study about ancient warfare, search maps. It is only that I give it to you chewed up and pre-digested to make it easier on you. But you have to remember, it's only my own perception. In fact, all this presentation will be my own perception, and I'll try to bring it with personal stories, with hand-waving and humoristic, grotesque scenes, and with weapons made out of cardboard, just to make it more interesting, because I realize that history is much better learned when it's presented as a good story, as a personal story. When it's well told, other than just a dry list of facts and events and data. And there's one more aspect, and that's the personification of the story, making it personalized, the personification of the events and the people and the areas, because what I've realized is that human beings have a hard time understanding big numbers, big events, big numbers. They're just numbers. Take 3,000 refugees that have fled via a torturous way. It's just a number in the news, but when the world sees a small boy lying face down dead in the sand, it really is shocking the world. Here is an example. Anna Frank, the story of Anna Frank, a small Jewish girl that tried to hide away from the Nazis. And a lot of people in the world know and have read the book of Anna Frank. Jews and non-Jews alike, even people who don't like the Jews, they could personalize the story because they read a story of a small, thin Jewish girl in a hideout, writing and telling about her fears and debates and dilemmas as a small girl. Maybe what people read it, what they think about their own girl or the girls they have been a long time ago. And if you talk about the Holocaust, I'll give you another example. As much as I've seen and I've read and I've been shocked. When I read the book of Elie Wiesel, Night, it's a small book about a small boy being transferred to the death camps. It even shocked me more because I get into his shoes. It's the personification, the details, the horrors of small boy riding the death trains into the death camps. So what I'm trying to do here is personalize the story, make it a personification of time and area and the people, the brothers of Hashmonai. And this is for you to get the real picture and to identify maybe with some of the events. And that's why I bring you a story. You may like it or you may not like it, or it may trigger you to go and find your own findings and do research, but this is the whole thing. With that being said, we must note, however, that there may be some problem with the details, because for such a long faraway period, we don't know much. We don't have any physical or tangible findings about that faraway period. And everybody must imagine, for example, daily life. It's not vital details for the story, but it's very interesting. I mean, what did they wear? Did they have the same clothing for peace, for battle, for holidays? What did they eat? We eat every day, right? Maybe a few times a day. What did they eat? We don't know, and probably we will never know. I can tell you what they didn't eat. They didn't have coffee in the morning and 5 o'clock tea. It was not yet then. They didn't have all the foods from the New World that has been discovered yet. Maybe they just dipped their pita bread in olive oil and had a piece of onion. And that's about it. But truly the details are very important, and the small details make the entire picture. So I'm trying to personalize the story according to what I see, but anybody can do it to their own liking. Let us make a quick summary of what's being presented thus far. For anyone, his time is short and pressing, and his patience is low. So for those who watched the opening preface and introduction so far, this is about the essence of the story. Pretty much the entire essence. But for those who are interested, I will bring interesting details from here on, because history, what can you do, is a kind of puzzle and containing many small details, and sometimes one must dig into the details in order to comprehend the big picture and the spirit of time. But in this presentation, I'm just trying to bring the viewer to the spirit of time, the zeitgeist, which is not an easy task for itself for people who were born years later in different eras. Now I will discuss the revolt only in its beginning. Under Yehuda Maccabee, I will not bring on purpose events, dates, battles, rulers and timetables, because this can anyone find for himself. But I will try to bring the zeitgeist and make some integration with the area, the power nation then, the ancient armies then, and make up, all this makes up the picture of this story, an entire picture. And this is, of course, in the eyes of someone who is not an historian. And this is without digging and piling up boring and tedious data. But what I would like the viewer to come out of this presentation are three things. First, that Yhuda Maccabee is the Lion of Judea. He's the power, he's the force, he's the might, he's the command, and he is the Maccabee. And everyone can interpret this to his own liking. And that Yehuda Maccabee was a top commander, warrior, and leader, and he's a world-class leader that somehow got to be forgotten and vanished. And second, the brothers are the Lions of Judea. They are the Lions Brotherhood. They have been unified and bound regardless of conditions, and this is also something that got to be forgotten. And third, that the prevailing saying few against many is an anemic slogan, because what really happened, if you extract the essence of the story, is that it is about a story of Wright brothers coming from nowhere, a bunch of nobodies, who defeated an empire. And this, in essence, it's the entire story. And maybe, just maybe, you'll come out with one more insight. In your darkest moments, in your hard times, just think about Judah and his troubles, and his life in the harsh mountains, in the harsh battles, raising a revolt when there is a hefty bounty on his head, and how he rose up, he overcame the challenges and defeated an empire. And about Jonathan, who was born and raised into life of continuous bloody battles, blood, sweat and tears, but he surpassed all challenges, and he became a brilliant commander and principal. And then compare these to your troubles, and you see that it's all a matter of perspective. As somebody said, I complained I had no shoes until I went to the hospital and see somebody with no legs. Or as Lincoln said once, people are as happy as they make up their minds to be. Until here is the preface and introduction. It's all the entire essence of the story. And for those who wants to broaden up their minds further, you're invited to watch further chapters and further details, because details makes up the entire picture.